2013 was a long time ago. This was me in 2013, and this is me now. Yes, back in a time when my power alleys weren't quite as powerful, there were Wonderkids and websites ranking them. One of them was Bleacher Report, who put together a list of the top 50 Wonderkids 21 and under going into the 2013 season. And of course you, yes you can be the judge of how good this list was as well, because of course there are names on here that are instantly recognizable, and perhaps a few that aren't. But we start at number 10 with one that absolutely is, or should be. Thiago Alcantara. He had turned 21 going into the 2013 season and was already making serious headway in the legendary Barcelona midfield that included names like Xavi, Andres Iniesta, and Cesc Fabregas at the time. Now, he could have gone the way of Sergio Busquets and stayed, but instead he left to go to Bayern Munich, but not before winning 4 La Liga titles and a Champions League with Barcelona. This is where his career really fell off. He won a paltry, truly awful 16 trophies while at Bayern Munich. I mean, that's child's play. Everybody knows that if you go to Bayern, you've got to win at least 20 trophies, or you basically didn't even play. Jokes aside, he won a Champions League as part of a domestic treble in his first season with Bayern Munich, and was widely regarded for a lot of his time there as one of the best and classiest midfielders in the world. As a result, he's been named to FIFA's FIFA Pro Men's Best 11 in the entire world 2 different times in his career. Number 9 was Stefan El Shaarawy. At the time, the 19-year-old Italian and his luxurious hair were destined for what could inarguably be called his best season in Serie A. The season after this list was made, The Guardian ranked Stefan El Shaarawy as the 52nd best player in the entire world. Not on a Wonderkid list, in the entire world. Halfway through this season, he was leading the Serie A Golden Boot race with 14 goals. He was the star AC Milan forward of the future. He had flair, he had style, and then he also had a lot of injuries, of course. The problem is that after his incredible breakout year, which was actually after this article came out, he had 2 years where he played a combined total of 28 matches for AC Milan. He had foot surgery, and then the recovery from foot surgery failed, and so he was delayed in his coming back for more than 2 more months. Just a sort of compounding disaster that ends up with you getting loaned out to Monaco after a couple of seasons, which is exactly what happened. Then he did a loan with Roma, and after that loan, they decided to exercise the clause and buy him for just 13 million euros. He played a few seasons at a decent level for Roma, but was then sold in the wave to China for 16 million euros in 2019, just 6 seasons after his inclusion on this list. 2 years after that, he got out of China on a free transfer and came back to Roma. He's playing in Serie A right now. And throughout all of his escapades with the injuries and the trip to China, he's managed to stay at least a fringe part of the Italian national team. He's never fallen completely off the map. His last goals were in 2020, but he does have 29 caps overall and just seems to hover around call-ups every now and again. And right now, he's still just 30 years old. He's made 72 appearances for Roma in the last 2 seasons, so he's in Jose Mourinho's good graces. Number 8 was Danny Welbeck. Yeah, injuries are going to be a big part of this story. Welbeck's a familiar name to basically anyone that was paying attention to English football around this time. He was part of the heir apparent, the next generation, the people coming up behind the Wayne Rooneys of the world that were going to be great, and he was literally behind Wayne Rooney at Manchester United when this list came out in 2013. And even with somebody like Wayne Rooney and Robin van Persie on the team, Danny Welbeck had made 23 appearances in the Premier League for Manchester United before this article even came out. He looked probably like one of the more sure bets that you could have put in the top 10. The problem was he just stayed stuck behind those guys, and after scoring 10 goals in 2014, he decided to ask for a way out. He wanted to play as a striker instead of out on the wing. It's a classic story, really. He made 142 appearances and scored 29 goals for Manchester United, and then got his move to Arsenal after that. And despite a bit of a slow start, he was beginning to play up to his potential for Arsene Wenger before the injuries began. Knee problems knocked him out until 2016, and then he hurt his knee again in 2016, and you wouldn't see him again until 2017. And by that time, he was back to playing semi-regularly, but he had a groin injury, he broke his ankle, and he just couldn't stay in the lineup consistently enough. His contract ran out, he bounced off Watford, and then ended up at Brighton, where he's had a successful spell as the grizzled goal-scoring veteran amongst one of the Premier League's most surprising teams. Certainly didn't go anywhere near his potential, but he's ended with 42 caps with England, unless he makes a surprise resurgence, and he did win a Premier League with Manchester United and a few cups along the way as well. A solid career, especially considering how long he spent on the sidelines. Number 7, Oscar. Forget about him, because this is a guy that looked like he had the world by the throat. And then when he was 25 years old, he disappeared. The Brazilian playmaker hadn't even played for Chelsea when this list came out. That's how highly regarded he was to be number 7 in the world on this list. And for 5 years, he was a staple at Chelsea, making 131 appearances. Because it's Chelsea, he played for 5 different managers in that time, but he won 2 Premier League titles as well. He was also a fixture of the Brazilian national team, scoring, and you might remember this, the lone Brazilian goal in a 7-1 defeat in a World Cup semi-final. People don't really talk about that one enough. But not long after that, he was signed for a raucous £60 million by Shanghai in the Chinese league. And that was kind of it. If you're wondering where he is, he still plays for Shanghai. I mean, he talks about in the media a romantic return to Chelsea. There was rumors that he might reappear at Barcelona as a cheaper option amongst their financial struggles to still bring in some quality. But the reality is he's been playing in China for the better part of a decade, and it would be very difficult for him to make the jump back to the top level of Europe. But hey, with Todd Boehly, anything's possible. Let's get him back to Chelsea. Why not? Number 6, Andre Schürrle. Yeah, I know. Another case of a very interesting player who also seemed to just disappear too early. Also, 2 players that were very heavily associated with that 7-1 game in the Brazil World Cup. But look, Andre Schürrle was a pretty good pick out by Bleacher Report. And Andre Schürrle in particular is just a very hard player to quantify. He won the World Cup. He's a huge reason Germany won the World Cup. You might not have remembered this, but Andre Schürrle is the player that assisted Mario Götze's winning goal in the World Cup final. He also, of course, put his stamp on that 7-1 win over Brazil by scoring an absolute stunner. But on the flip side, he never made more than 66 appearances for any one club. He was a bit of a mercenary. 10 years ago, he was at Bayer Leverkusen, then he bounced to Chelsea, Wolfsburg, and Borussia Dortmund, but by the time he got to Dortmund, his talent was already waning. And that was in 2016. From 2016 to 2018, he only made 33 appearances for Borussia Dortmund before consecutive loans. First to Fulham, and then he went to Spartak Moscow, and then that was it. He retired at the age of 29. But what he will be remembered for, what he will always be remembered for, is being one of the first names on Jürgen Löw's team sheet when he was managing Germany. 57 appearances and 22 goals for the German national team. But what we haven't had on this list in a while is a player that could be considered a bona fide world-class player consistently throughout their career, and number 5's Christian Eriksen, so we flipped that around. Christian Eriksen was the classic European golden boy. He was a regular in Ajax from the age of 18, and by the time he made this list, he'd already made over 20 appearances for the Denmark national team, the senior Denmark national team. After this article came out, he won the Eredivisie at Ajax and then said he wasn't going to renew his contract, which is going to sound familiar in a second. Eriksen was, of course, the mainstay in that trophyless but golden Tottenham generation under Mauricio Pochettino, the crowning achievement being a Champions League final appearance in 2019. But after 7 years of the hard-running style, he said he wasn't going to renew his contract and got a move to Inter. Then he added the incredibly impressive feat of surviving a cardiac arrest on the field during the Euros, which was one of the most harrowing and then heartwarming stories I've ever seen, because he miraculously came back from that to play for Brentford and now at a world-class level again with Manchester United. Well, maybe not a world-class level. I mean, it is Manchester United now, but by any measure, he's had a brilliant career. 125 Denmark appearances so far, and the vast majority of his career spent in the withering spotlight of the top of the Premier League. But he was behind number 4, who was Lucas Moura. That's right, at one time, Lucas Moura was considered the 4th best under-21 player in the world. This article had come out at probably the apex of his popularity. He'd just signed a huge transfer from Brazil to PSG after a competition between Manchester United and PSG for his signature. It was a massive move, 45 million euros, and it felt mostly justified because he'd already made 15 senior appearances for freaking Brazil. But that last step up from being a good player to a great player was just one that seemed to elude him. Unlike a lot of players on this list, he didn't really get hurt that much. He played 153 matches at PSG, won a handful of French league titles, but he only scored 34 goals as an attacking player and just wasn't a major difference maker. And in January of 2018, that resulted in a discount move to Tottenham for just £25 million. Now at Tottenham, he obviously didn't win any trophies. Sorry. Hi, I'm Zealand. I got 2 different Tottenham trophy jokes into this video. Tottenham trophy jokes. Sometimes they're just too easy. But in spite of his above average but not great performances, he is of course responsible for arguably one of the most dramatic moments in footballing history, certainly of the past decade, when he scored a second-half hat trick in the second leg of the Champions League semi-final to flip certain defeat against Ajax into stunning victory. He would go on to play with Tottenham until this year before getting his move back to Brazil. He never really became a mainstay in the Brazilian national team once he got to Europe, although he did make the final squad for the Copa America tournament in 2016. Number 3 is another player that is defined by one moment: Mario Götze. At the time this list came out, Mario Götze looked like one of the most proven top-level players that you could possibly put on this list. He had just been a part of consecutive Bundesliga titles with Borussia Dortmund, including a double the second time around where they also won the German Cup. And oh, by the way, they made the Champions League final the year after this was written. And because, of course, this is Germany, that meant that Mario Götze had his release clause triggered and he moved to Bayern Munich, a move he would later say he regretted. He never had huge catastrophic injuries, but he always struggled for muscular fitness, and he was unable to become more than a potentially influential rotational player at Bayern Munich. But of course, while he was at Bayern Munich, he happened to score the winning goal in extra time of the World Cup final. A moment inspired by a story The Athletic recounts in an article where Joachim Löw told Mario Götze when he subbed into the World Cup final to go out there and prove he was better than Messi. Now, it might have worked that one time. Now, of course, his time at Bayern was full of trophies, but he ended up back at Borussia Dortmund in 2016, at which time he was diagnosed with something called myopathy. This is a metabolic disease that causes fatigue and kind of messes with your muscles and explains the issues that he'd had with his muscles. He came back in 2017 and has been a pretty consistently good player since. He's operated in some ways like Danny Welbeck, a mercenary for hire that can be an influential, skilled, confident veteran. He went to PSV in 2020 and then landed back in Germany at Eintracht Frankfurt in 2022 and has been a part of their kind of revival. Perhaps most remarkably, he made both World Cup rosters in 2018 and 2022 after his other World Cup heroics, and he has 66 caps to his name, which is very respectable and makes that number 3 pick in the world look high, but not awful. Number 2 was Neymar. Now, I'm just going to assume that you kind of know the story, most expensive player of all time and all that, but I will say, despite the fact that he's had terrible ankles for most of his career, he's Brazil's all-time leading scorer and arguably one of the best players to ever lace them up. So, number 2 is right. But at the start of the 2013 season, they were all behind one man. And that's why we're making this video, because that man was Eden Hazard. He'd just moved to Chelsea for £32 million, and he was about to embark on one of the most the streets will never forget careers anyone's ever seen. He won the Premier League twice. He won the Europa League twice. He won Players' Player of the Year. And he also made FIFA's men's best 11 for the entire world. He captained Belgium to a World Cup semi-final and was a shining light in the outfield triumvirate that marked the Belgian golden generation. But he just wasn't part of the psycho 24/7 take care of your body crowd that seems to have taken over the modern game. As a result, he wasn't 100% every game. Sometimes he wouldn't show up, and sometimes he'd score the best goal you'd ever seen. But he was still good enough for Real Madrid to splash an absurd 150 million euros on him in 2019. But he managed to put together a Gareth Balean combination of terrible form and terrible injury luck to essentially evaporate from the Real Madrid team sheet by the time we got to this year, when he let his contract out and then he just retired. And while everybody, including this list of Wonderkids from 10 years ago, seems to be in agreement that if Eden Hazard had trained 24/7 and not eaten McDonald's every once in a while, that he would have maybe been the best player of all time. But you know what? He didn't. He had fun doing other stuff and had a career that basically everybody would be jealous of. And in some ways, I have to respect that. But Neymar probably should have been number 1. Probably. Let me know how Bleacher Report did in the comments or on stream. The entire 50-player article is down in the description and includes a lot of very recognizable names and some names that I had legitimately never heard of. But you can also save that for later and keep binge-watching videos. That video right there is a documentary of me going to New York's biggest football derby, soccer rivalry, whatever you want to call it. It was a good time and a new style of video that we're trying out, so if you like it, let me know.